You did exactly what the system instructed you to do from the day you entered the workforce. You bought the suburban house, consistently funded the target date retirement fund, and financed the sensible vehicles. Yet every single month feels like a masterclass in financial suffocation. The uncomfortable reality is that your predictable, lifelong consumption is the exact asset Wall Street relies on to build their wealth, not yours. Welcome to ClearCut Wealth. Today, we are dismantling the modern American dream and exposing it for what it has actually become, a highly engineered systemic erosion of middle-class capital. This is not about market corrections or apocalyptic economic theories. This is about the quiet, relentless math that is draining your net worth while you sleep and the exact steps you need to take to stop the bleeding. If you look back at the financial landscape of the 1990s, the blueprint for a prosperous life was relatively straightforward and, more importantly, mathematically viable. A single median income could comfortably secure a median-priced home, fully fund a traditional pension, and still leave discretionary income for a meaningful standard of living. That era is fundamentally dead, replaced by a financial ecosystem that prioritizes corporate revenue over individual wealth preservation. Today, the traditional advice handed down by the baby boomer generation, just save 10%, buy a house, and trust the process, has become a financial trap for Gen X and older millennials. It is advice built for an economy that simply no longer exists. The federal funds rate fluctuations, the silent tax of inflation, and the fundamental shift from guaranteed pensions to self-managed 401k plans have entirely transferred the burden of risk onto your shoulders. Yet the societal pressure to consume at those romanticized 1990s levels remains at an all-time high. Let us examine the exact anatomy of this trap through Mark and Sarah, a hypothetical but statistically accurate 48-year-old couple living in a suburb of Dallas, Texas. Mark is a mid-level logistics manager. Sarah works in healthcare administration. Together, they pull in a respectable gross household income of $135,000 a year. On paper, they are the picture of American success. They're in the top tier of global earners. But let us look at the brutal reality of their household cash flow. After federal taxes, FICA, state property taxes, and baseline health insurance premiums, their take-home pay is immediately slashed to roughly $8,200 a month. Now, let's factor in the American dream they were sold. They purchased a modest $450,000 home 3 years ago. With a standard down payment and a modern interest rate of around 6.5%, their monthly mortgage payment, inclusive of property taxes and insurance, sits at about $3,100. That's nearly 40% of their net income completely immobilized by housing alone. But the consumption engine doesn't stop at the front door. Mark and Sarah have 2 vehicles, not luxury sports cars, just standard, dependable crossovers necessary to commute and transport their teenagers. The average monthly payment for a new vehicle is now hovering around $720. Multiply that by 2, add insurance and maintenance, and another $1,700 vanishes from the ledger. We haven't even discussed utilities, groceries, which have seen compounded double-digit inflation over the last few years, or the astronomical out-of-pocket costs of their children's activities. By the time Mark and Sarah reach the end of the month, despite earning well over 6 figures, they are left with perhaps $400 of truly discretionary capital. They are mathematically trapped in a cycle of high-velocity cash flow with zero actual wealth accumulation. And here's the critical part. Wall Street absolutely loves Mark and Sarah. The financial sector doesn't want Mark and Sarah to become fiercely independent liquid investors. The system thrives on their debt. When Mark and Sarah carry a $7,000 balance on their credit card at 24% interest just to smooth out the bumps of a high-cost month, they are directly subsidizing the dividend yields of major banking institutions. When they blindly contribute to a high-fee mutual fund within their 401k because they never learned to read a prospectus, they are paying a hidden premium to asset managers who take a cut whether the market is up or down. The illusion of the American dream today is the conflation of the appearance of wealth with actual structural wealth. Mark and Sarah have a lot of nice things, but they don't own their time. They are engaged in a form of indentured servitude to their own lifestyle choices that were heavily marketed to them as mandatory milestones of adulthood.
The entire architecture of modern consumerism is designed to extract maximum capital from the middle class, leaving just enough crumbs on the table to keep you reporting to work on Monday morning. Let us look deeper into the psychology of this setup. The reason the middle class is squeezed so effectively is because the boundaries of normal consumption have been artificially expanded. 30 years ago, a middle-class family took one modest vacation a year, drove cars for a decade, and considered dining out a luxury. Today, the baseline expectation, driven by algorithmic social media and relentless digital marketing, includes annual international travel, leasing a new vehicle every 3 years, and treating convenience services like food delivery as a standard utility. This is not accidental. The corporate ecosystem has brilliantly commodified convenience, selling you back the time that your exhausting commute and demanding job have stolen from you. When you analyze the macroeconomic data, the divergence between productivity and wage growth is staggering. Since the late 1970s, worker productivity has skyrocketed, largely due to technological advancements, yet the compensation for that productivity has flatlined when adjusted for the real cost of living. Who captured the surplus value of your increased productivity? It was captured by corporate margins and subsequently by Wall Street shareholders. You were working more efficiently than any generation in human history, yet you are mathematically falling behind because the structural costs of healthcare, education, and housing have vastly outpaced your paycheck. This systemic erosion is subtle. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens over 3 decades of auto loans, 30-year mortgages, and the relentless pressure to upgrade your lifestyle the moment you get a raise. Wall Street banks on your financial complacency. They bank on the fact that after a 40-hour work week, you are too exhausted to calculate the compound interest you are losing to administrative fees, or too burned out to restructure your household balance sheet. You are kept in a perpetual state of financial defense, simply reacting to the next bill, the next tax hike, or the next unexpected expense. You were handed a script that says hard work equals financial freedom, but hard work applied within a system designed to extract your capital through interest, fees, and inflated lifestyle costs only results in exhaustion. The institutions that manage your mortgages, your student loans, and your retirement accounts are entirely dependent on your financial illiteracy. They need you to remain a passive consumer of debt and a passive allocator of your investments. That realization is the very first step towards clawing back your financial sovereignty.
Let us move past the theoretical and dive directly into the mathematical autopsy of how your wealth is being systematically siphoned. The financial services industry relies on a very specific psychological phenomenon. Human beings are notoriously terrible at comprehending compound interest, especially when it is working against them. You are conditioned to look at the top-line numbers, your gross salary, the overall balance of your 401k, the appraised value of your home. But wealth preservation is not found in the gross, it is found in the net. It is found in the painstaking decimal point mathematics that occur after the Federal Reserve, the IRS, and Wall Street asset managers have all taken their respective cuts. To understand this, we need to look at Linda. Linda is a 62-year-old middle management professional living in Columbus, Ohio. She is staring down the barrel of retirement in 3 years. Linda did exactly what the financial brochures told her to do. For the last 30 years, she diligently contributed $10,000 annually into her employer-sponsored 401k plan. She never touched it. She never tried to time the market. She just funneled her capital into a suite of actively managed target date mutual funds recommended by her plan administrator. Today, Linda looks at her account balance and sees roughly $744,000. She feels a sense of accomplishment. But what Linda does not see, because the system is designed to obscure it, is the ghost balance, the money she actually earned, but that was intercepted by the financial sector. Let us run the exact math on Linda's 3-decade investment horizon. We will assume the broader stock market provided an average annualized gross return of 7% over those 30 years. If Linda had simply purchased a low-cost, broad-market index fund with a near-zero expense ratio, say 0.04%, her capital would have compounded to approximately $944,000. But Linda's actively managed mutual funds carried an average expense ratio of 1.2%. To the untrained eye, 1.2% sounds negligible. It sounds like a tiny administrative fee. It is anything but. That 1.2% fee is not assessed merely on her annual gains. It is assessed on her entire total asset balance, year after year, in up markets and in down markets. When the market drops 20% during a systemic correction, her fund manager still extracts that 1.2% from her remaining shrinking capital. Over 30 years, that seemingly harmless fee creates a massive drag on compounding. It is the mathematical equivalent of swimming across a river while dragging a parachute. The difference between her actual balance of $744,000 and the baseline index fund balance of $944,000 is a staggering $200,000. Wall Street effectively confiscated 21% of her total potential wealth generation. But we can't just look at this as abstract currency. We must translate this into what it actually represents: human labor and finite time. If Linda's average post-tax earning rate over her career was roughly $30 an hour, that missing $200,000 represents over 6,600 hours of her actual life. That's more than 3 full, grueling years of waking up in the dark, scraping ice off her windshield in the Ohio winter, and dealing with workplace politics, completely handed over to a fund manager in a high-rise office, who, statistically speaking, likely failed to even beat the baseline index benchmark. She did the labor, she took the risk, and Wall Street harvested the yield. Now, let's anticipate the immediate objection. You might be saying, but my financial advisor said those actively managed funds provide downside protection during market volatility. They're navigating the ship for me. Let's be brutally honest about this narrative. The empirical data overwhelmingly proves that over a 15-year horizon, over 90% of large-cap active fund managers failed to outperform a simple S&P 500 index. You are paying a premium for a service that mathematically fails to deliver on its core premise. Your advisor or fund manager is compensated regardless of your outcome. You provide 100% of the underlying capital, you assume 100% of the market risk, yet you are surrendering a fifth of your lifetime upside. This is not a service, it is a structural wealth transfer. The bleeding doesn't stop at asset management fees. Let us bring back Mark and Sarah from Texas, our high-earning, high-consuming couple. Recognizing they are cash poor, they decide to build a defensive moat. They manage to scrape together $50,000 and place it in a high-yield savings account currently boasting a 4% interest rate. They feel incredibly responsible. They believe they are finally getting ahead. Let's dissect the illusion of the safe cash position. That 4% yield is a nominal return, not a real return. First, the IRS steps into the equation. Because Mark and Sarah are in the 24% marginal tax bracket, that 4% yield is immediately taxed as ordinary income. After federal taxes, their return drops to 3.04%. Next, we must account for the silent, most insidious tax of all: inflation. The Federal Reserve explicitly targets a 2% annual inflation rate as a matter of policy, meaning it is their stated goal to devalue your currency by 2% every single year. However, real-world purchasing power erosion, the cost of groceries, utilities, and property insurance, frequently runs closer to 3.5% or 4%. If their post-tax return is 3.04% and real inflation is running at 3.5%, their net real return is negative 0.46%. By leaving that capital in a supposedly safe, conservative vehicle, Mark and Sarah are mathematically guaranteeing the slow, steady destruction of their purchasing power. Their $50,000 is safely and securely losing value every single day. The American middle class is trapped in a pincer movement.
On one side, high-fee financial products siphon off the compounding growth necessary for true independence. On the other side, central banking policies and tax structures relentlessly degrade the value of their liquidity. You are being forced to navigate a maze where every single turn demands a toll, and the only way to survive is to stop acting like a passenger and start treating your household balance sheet with the ruthlessness of a corporate chief financial officer.
We have established the mathematical erosion of your capital, but the most terrifying question remains. Why do highly intelligent, rational professionals willingly walk into these mathematical traps year after year? Why does a surgeon, an aerospace engineer, or a senior project manager consistently make financial choices that objectively destroy their net worth? It is not a lack of intellect, it is a psychological hijacking. The entire modern consumption engine is built on behavioral economics. Wall Street, automotive manufacturers, and corporate retail have spent billions of dollars studying your dopamine receptors, and they have successfully weaponized your innate human desire for status against your own balance sheet. Consider David, a 55-year-old structural engineer living in a premium zip code just outside of Chicago. By all accounts, David is a brilliant man. His daily occupation requires him to calculate complex load-bearing equations, manage risk, and guarantee structural integrity. Yet David's household balance sheet is a structural disaster waiting to collapse. Over the last decade, as David's income climbed from $90,000 to $180,000, his actual net worth barely moved. Why? Because David fell victim to what we call the mandatory success tax. It is the psychological illusion that your consumption must scale aggressively alongside your income to signal your competence and your value to society. Let us break down the exact math of David's success tax. 5 years ago, David received a massive promotion to regional director. To celebrate and to project the image of a senior executive to his peers, he traded in a perfectly functioning, paid-off domestic sedan for a $75,000 imported luxury SUV. He financed $60,000 of that vehicle at a seemingly reasonable 5% over 60 months. His monthly payment is roughly $1,130. Over 5 years, he will pay nearly $8,000 just in interest. But the true devastation is the opportunity cost. If David had simply kept his reliable car and deployed that $1,130 a month into a standard S&P 500 index fund for those exact same 5 years, assuming a historical 7% return, he would have accumulated over $80,000 in liquid capital. Instead, he owns a rapidly depreciating piece of machinery now worth maybe $35,000. His psychological need to signal his success to other drivers on the interstate just cost his future self roughly $45,000 in completely unrecoverable wealth. This brings us to the evolution of keeping up with the Joneses. In the 1980s and 90s, your financial comparison group was strictly geographical. You compared yourself to your neighbors, your brother-in-law, or your colleagues at the office. If the guy next door bought a boat, you felt a slight twinge of envy, but that was the ceiling of your exposure. Today, the geographical boundaries of status comparison have been entirely obliterated by algorithmic media. You are no longer competing with your neighbor. You are competing with the carefully curated, heavily filtered highlight reels of the top 1% of the entire globe. You open your phone, and you are immediately bombarded with images of peers taking their children on bespoke European vacations, upgrading to massive custom-built homes, and dining at Michelin-starred restaurants. This constant digital exposure triggers a severe cognitive bias known as relative deprivation. You objectively have a roof over your head, food in the refrigerator, and climate control, putting you historically in the top fraction of 1% of all humans who have ever lived. Yet you feel entirely inadequate. You feel like you are falling behind. The media apparatus thrives on manufacturing this inadequacy. They sell you the narrative that if you do not possess these things, you are actively failing your family.
This manufactured fear of missing out forces you into emotional spending. You book the luxury resort on a credit card because you feel you owe your kids the same aesthetic experiences they see online. You are attempting to solve an internal psychological deficit with external high-interest consumer debt. Now, I hear the immediate objection to this. You are sitting there thinking, but I work 60 hours a week. I deserve to enjoy the fruits of my labor. You cannot take the money with you when you die, so what is the point of hoarding it? That's the exact rationalization the financial system prays you will use. Let us confront that logic with brutal realism. There is a massive, fundamental difference between utilizing wealth to enhance your life and financing a lifestyle to numb your exhaustion. When you say you are treating yourself with a financed luxury vehicle or a vacation paid for on revolving credit, you are not treating yourself. You are actively punishing your future older self. You are stealing the dignity and financial security of a 70-year-old version of you just to satisfy the dopamine craving of the 45-year-old version of you. Furthermore, we have normalized chronic financial stress under the guise of the standard American experience. We have adopted the mindset that carrying consumer debt is just the normal part of adult life. You look around, and everyone else is drowning in auto loans, massive mortgage payments, and credit card balances. So you assume your drowning is just the natural state of existence. It's the herd mentality at its most dangerous. If the entire herd is marching steadily towards a cliff of financial insolvency, marching in the middle of the pack doesn't make you safe. It just means you'll have company when you go over the edge. To achieve actual financial sovereignty, you have to perform a psychological autopsy on your own spending habits. You have to detach your self-worth from the brands you wear, the square footage of the neighborhood you live in, and the sheet metal you park in your driveway. You have to view every single dollar not as a token to purchase temporary status, but as an employee that you hire to buy back your time. Wall Street wants you emotional, exhausted, and desperately trying to prove your worth to strangers. A pragmatic wealth builder is cold, analytical, and completely immune to the opinions of a society that is, statistically speaking, entirely broke. The moment you stop caring about looking wealthy is the exact moment you begin to actually become wealthy.
We have diagnosed the disease. We have exposed the mathematical traps and the psychological conditioning designed to keep your net worth suppressed. Now, we execute the cure. This is where the theoretical stops and the tactical deployment begins. What I am about to give you is the strategic masterclass, the exact step-by-step actions you must take on Monday morning to sever the umbilical cord feeding Wall Street with your future security. You are no longer a passive consumer of financial products. As of today, you are the chief financial officer of your household enterprise, and your first order of business is stopping the systemic bleeding of your capital. Step 1 begins with an uncompromising audit of your liabilities. Let us look at Robert, a 52-year-old regional sales manager in Illinois. Robert currently holds $12,000 in revolving credit card debt at an annual percentage rate of 22%. Yet Robert is simultaneously contributing $500 a month into a standard taxable brokerage account, hoping to pick the next winning tech stock. This is financial cognitive dissonance at its absolute worst. From a purely mathematical standpoint, Robert is borrowing money at 22% to potentially earn an optimistic 8% in the market. That is a guaranteed annualized net loss of 14%. On Monday morning, Robert must halt all discretionary investing. Every single available dollar must be deployed to annihilate that high-interest debt. Paying off a 22% credit card is mathematically identical to finding an investment that guarantees a 22% risk-free, tax-free return. In the history of modern finance, no such investment exists. You must ruthlessly eliminate the debt that is actively working against your compounding efforts before you can build the structural foundation of your wealth.
Once the high-interest liabilities are neutralized, your next priority at 9 o'clock on Monday morning is the comprehensive cleansing of your employer-sponsored 401k. The vast majority of Americans set their retirement allocations during their initial human resources onboarding and never look at them again. You are going to log into your provider's portal, navigate to your current investment elections, and find the specific column labeled expense ratio or net prospectus figure. If you see any number starting with a 1 or even a 0.5%, you are actively being harvested. Your immediate action is to reallocate those funds away from the actively managed high-fee mutual funds and directly into a broad market low-cost S&P 500 or total stock market index fund. You are looking for expense ratios in the neighborhood of 0.03 or 0.04%. You are firing the expensive asset manager who cannot beat the market, and you are simply buying the entire market itself. If you want to immediately audit your portfolio for these hidden parasitic fees without the headache, I use a platform called Portfolio Optimizer. There's a link in the description below. It takes 5 minutes to securely sync your accounts and see exactly how much Wall Street is siphoning from your retirement. Use it. Let us transition to one of the most violently misunderstood and underutilized wealth preservation vehicles in the United States tax code, the Health Savings Account, or HSA. Traditional boomer financial advice treats the HSA as a glorified checking account to pay for immediate dental work or prescription copays. That is a catastrophic waste of a structural advantage. If you have a qualifying high-deductible health plan, the HSA is the only account in the American financial system that offers a triple tax advantage. Your contributions are tax-deductible, the capital grows completely tax-free, and distributions are tax-free when used for qualified medical expenses. The pragmatic wealth strategy is to fully fund the HSA to the absolute maximum limit, refuse to reimburse yourself for current medical expenses, pay those out of your standard cash flow, and invest the underlying HSA capital into low-cost index funds for the next 2 decades. When you are 65, you will have a massive, compounded, tax-free war chest to address the reality of escalating Medicare premiums and senior healthcare costs. For those of you in higher income brackets, let us say you and your spouse are bringing in over $240,000 a year, effectively pricing you out of direct Roth IRA contributions. Your Monday morning strategy involves executing a backdoor Roth conversion. The system attempts to block high earners from accessing tax-free growth, but the IRS tax code provides a completely legal mechanical workaround. You contribute the maximum allowable non-deductible amount into a traditional IRA. You leave it in a cash settlement fund for a few days to ensure no gains are generated, and then you immediately convert that entire balance into a Roth IRA. Because the initial contribution was made with after-tax dollars and no growth occurred, the conversion itself is a largely non-taxable event. You have just successfully bypassed the income limits and parked thousands of dollars into a vehicle that will compound for the next 20 years, completely shielded from future capital gains taxes. This is how the wealthy operate. They don't complain about the tax code. They meticulously read the rules and utilize every single legal mechanism to insulate their capital from government extraction. Now, I know exactly what the edge case objection is. You're looking at the current economic indicators, you're watching the financial news networks manufacture panic, and you're asking, but what if I do all this? I move my money into index funds, and the market experiences a massive correction next month. This is where your calculated realism must override your biological fear response. If you are 45 or 55 years old, a near-term market correction is mathematically irrelevant to a long-term acquisition strategy. In fact, if you are continuously dollar-cost averaging into your 401k every 2 weeks, a market downturn simply means you are acquiring more shares of the greatest companies in the American economy at a steep discount. Your dividend reinvestments are buying at the bottom. Wall Street relies on the retail investor to panic and sell during volatility, so institutional money can buy your assets for pennies. You will not participate in that wealth transfer. You will automate your contributions. You will aggressively eliminate your debt. You will eradicate your administrative fees. And you will systematically acquire productive assets, regardless of whatever manufactured crisis the media is selling on any given Monday.
Let us elevate our perspective. We have spent the previous segments auditing the granular mathematics of your immediate reality, dissecting the precise mechanisms that siphon your capital on a daily basis. But the true gravity of these strategic shifts does not manifest next week or even next year. The ultimate consequence of your financial architecture reveals itself 2 decades down the timeline, in the quiet, unglamorous moments of your late 60s and 70s. The decisions you execute this coming Monday morning will determine whether those years are defined by absolute autonomy or by a quiet, desperate reliance on a fractured system. Consider the trajectory of James and Eleanor, a couple currently sitting at 45 years old, residing in a standard suburb outside of Atlanta. Right now, they are perfectly mirroring the statistical average. They earn a combined $140,000. They carry 2 auto loans totaling $1,600 a month. They service a bloated mortgage, and they hold $15,000 in revolving credit card debt. They are entirely consumed with the present. If they choose the path of least resistance, the path heavily subsidized and encouraged by modern media, they will simply maintain this consumption loop. They will occasionally upgrade the cars. They will refinance the house to pull out equity for a kitchen renovation, and they will save a meager 5% in their high-fee 401k plans. Fast forward 20 years. James and Eleanor are now 65. The facade of the American dream has entirely evaporated, leaving only the brutal math of aging. Their heavily managed retirement accounts, crippled by decades of administrative fees, hold perhaps $400,000. Using a standard 4% safe withdrawal rate, that portfolio generates a mere $16,000 a year in supplementary income. Because they never broke the cycle of debt, they still have a mortgage payment and a car payment. They are mathematically forced to continue working into their 70s, not out of passion, but out of absolute biological necessity. Their energy is fading. Their health is naturally declining, yet they are still trading their most precious commodity, their diminishing time, just to service the liabilities they acquired in their 40s. Now let us examine the alternative timeline. Suppose James and Eleanor listen to the math today. They execute a ruthless restructuring of their household balance sheet. They sell the financed vehicles and buy reliable, depreciated sedans with cash. They aggressively annihilate the credit card debt. They halt the unnecessary lifestyle upgrades and optimize their tax-advantaged accounts. Through these sheer defensive maneuvers, they successfully free up $2,500 a month in captured cash flow. They do not spend it. They deploy that capital automatically every single month into a low-cost S&P 500 index fund. They do this for the exact same 20-year period, assuming a historical inflation-adjusted return of 7%. That monthly deployment does not just add up, it compounds into a staggering $1.3 million of liquid, accessible capital. Add that to whatever baseline they had already accumulated, and their reality at 65 is fundamentally unrecognizable from the first scenario. They own their home outright. They have zero consumer debt. Their portfolio can comfortably generate over $50,000 a year of passive, tax-optimized income without ever touching the principal. They do not have to ask a regional manager for time off to visit their grandchildren. They do not have to panic when property taxes increase. They have achieved the singular, ultimate goal of wealth building. They have successfully purchased their own freedom. At this point, the most common objection I hear from the middle class is a defensive reliance on the state. People will say, "But I have paid into the system my entire life. What about my Social Security benefits? I will just factor that in and live comfortably." This is perhaps the most dangerous edge case of all, relying on a demographic and mathematical vulnerability to fund your twilight years.
Let us look at the federal data. The ratio of contributing workers to beneficiaries is steadily collapsing. The trust fund reserves are continuously being revised downward, with projections indicating potential depletion of surplus reserves within the next 10 to 15 years. Even if we assume the government patches the system and pays 100% of promised benefits, the average monthly Social Security check currently sits around $1,900. In what major metropolitan area does $1,900 cover property taxes, utilities, food, and the astronomical out-of-pocket costs of late-stage healthcare? The average retired couple today will need over $300,000 just to cover medical expenses that Medicare does not absorb. Relying on a historically strained, politically volatile federal program to serve as the foundation of your retirement is not a strategy. It's an absolute abdication of your personal responsibility. Now, before we conclude this blueprint, I must explicitly state the reality of our interaction. I am just a guy on the internet sharing my research, my mathematical models, and my reading of macroeconomic history. I am not your personal advisor, and I am entirely blind to your specific tax liabilities, your family dynamics, or your unique risk tolerance. You should always consult a fiduciary, a professional legally obligated to act strictly in your best financial interest before executing sweeping changes to your asset allocation. However, you must walk into that fiduciary's office not as a helpless consumer asking to be saved, but as an educated, pragmatic architect demanding a highly specific structural execution. The American dream was never originally defined by the mindless accumulation of depreciating plastic, the square footage of a suburban home, or the emblem on the steering wheel of your vehicle. It was fundamentally defined by sovereignty. It was the radical idea that a citizen could labor, retain the fruits of that labor, and build a fortress of independence that no institution could breach. Wall Street and the corporate consumption engine have spent the last 50 years systematically convincing you to trade that sovereignty for convenience and artificial status. They have convinced you to willingly hand over your capital in exchange for the illusion of wealth. It is time to shatter that illusion. It is time to look at your balance sheet with the cold, calculated realism of a corporate executive. Stop subsidizing the banking sector with your high-interest debt. Stop surrendering 20% of your lifetime gains to asset managers who cannot beat a basic index fund. Stop financing a lifestyle designed to impress people who are just as mathematically trapped as you are. Wealth is not what you see. Wealth is the unspent capital, the compounding interest, and the quiet dignity of knowing you are entirely self-reliant. The system is designed to consume you. Choose today to become the architect of your own extraction. Build your moat, protect your capital, and take your life back.
And brought life back to the land.